What's up, farmers? Hope everybody's doing excellent and getting through build season. Couldn't be a better time to spend in the garage, especially considering this past week has been, I think, the coldest part of the winter we've experienced, and I think may have actually dipped into negative temps first time this winter. And that means a good day to be in the garage. Got the old lights out 11 on and working on the car. So if you watched my last video, you would have saw the coilover mounting bar install. I got that all wrapped up. The next step is the anti-roll bar, and I think we're gonna go through that today. And then the last thing I need to do before I can pull the red back out, clean it up, paint it, and assemble it all and be done with that. So sit down, grab yourself a beverage, and hang out. So like I was saying, I have the coilover bar all welded in. Everything's done with that. And the tabs are on the bar. And my fake shocks are actually holding the rear end up right now. So I do have jacks underneath it just in case were to break or something, and just instead of dropping down to the ground, I just drop a little bit onto the jacks. Like I said, today I'm going to talk about the anti-roll bar and how I'm going about installing it. Every kit's going to be a little different, every situation's going to be a little different, so this is mainly just a guide as to how I'm doing it, and maybe it'll help you think or figure out a way to do it for yourselves. But the first thing is, now I have the Team Z Weld It Billet arm roll bar or anti-roll bar kit, where it just comes in pieces with a length of I think it's 1.25 inch diameter by 1/4 inch thick chromoly tubing for the anti-roll bar torsion bar. Comes with all your links, your heim joints, your link tubing, everything. It's a pretty nice kit, and the mounting tabs are actually already sized for 1 5/8 inch tube, and these are the mounting tabs here. So it worked out well having the Tin Soldier's coilover mount bar, because that's 1 5/8 inch. And the thing is with these tabs though, they're kind of they're not full circle, but they're just enough, they're beyond half, so you have to slide them on from the end. You can't just, I mean, you can grind them down a little bit probably and slip them over, but you gotta think, kind of sort out where you're gonna place it, and these tabs all depend on the width, because the mounting bushings are they need to be up against your arm, your roll bar arm, like this. So as you can see, I already have this one side welded on, and getting ready to weld the second arm on. But I thought I'd show just what I came up with to install it, because as you can see, there's no holes or anything. So what I did was took my die grinder and just on the inside portion, I created a little bit of a chamfer on it, and on the outside face I created a bigger chamfer. I don't know if you can see it as well. So that one's large, That one's smaller. And the reason to have a smaller chamfer on the inside is because, like I said, this mounting bushing actually is gonna, or I guess supposed to touch your face of your arm. So the small inside chamfer, I can weld just a small enough bead to try and keep it tight, you know, as tight as possible. Then I also, it's gonna be hard to see. Give me a minute and I'll pull that mounting bushing off and show you as I chamfered that as well. All right, I got this mounting bushing off, and you can see there's a chamfer there. When you get it, it's just a square face. But I chamfered that with my die grinder to try and give me some room, so that way I'm not getting bound up on the weld bead on the inside. Now that I'm looking at it, I'm also thinking of another thing that I had to do in order to actually put these on the bar here. The bar, I forget what it measured out. It was right around 1.25 inches, a couple thousandths bigger, I think. But these bushings, I think they pressed them in after this outer shell was all welded up, and what that did was made the shell in those spots where it was welded a little bit smaller in diameter. And actually I couldn't get this bushing on, so I had to get a small hone. Let's see where I put it. So in order to open this up without having a machine or anything, what I did was went to AutoZone or Riley's, wherever, and get one of these cheap little three rock hones, and you just put it in a drill, basically hone out this ID until you get a nice fit over this torsional shaft. Now mine are kind of, let's say, snug, but I think it'll all kind of wear in. This is brass or bronze. I think it'll kind of wear in and loosen up as it gets used. So it won't, like in some of the instructions you see, they say that the arms should fall on their own. So mine likely won't do that. If you want to open yours up more to do that, then it's fine. But if you can see in here, you can see how there's shiny spots and then duller spots, and they're all kind of around this weld spot here. So that's where this is welded. It's kind of leaving a ring inside there and pushing in on the brass and making that diameter smaller. I would have thought they would have came finished at size, but you know, that's the way it is. Not a big deal, just got to get through it. So in addition to chamfering the arm, I also put a chamfer about of equal size on the shaft itself on the outside, so that way I could get deeper in there, I guess would be the way to put it. There's other roll bar or other roll bar kits out there where they have a groove cut through it here. I would like that. I think that's a good idea, because then you can weld in there and not to worry about messing the face up or anything like that. Obviously on the outside it's not such a big deal, but on that inside face, I mean, you don't want to have this bar banging back and forth, so you want these up against the face to keep it from doing that. And I actually ended up needing to touch the chamfer on the bushings up a little bit after I welded this one, just to see how good things fit. But I think everything will be just fine. So that's what I did. So basically, I'll get this other, another part of importance, I guess, forgot to cover, is this bar, when they ship it to you, is like 30 inches long. So you gotta figure out where you're gonna mount it and all that stuff. And then cut it to length and work from there. The other really important thing that I feel is needed to be passed on, and I didn't realize it until not too long ago, but the way I'm building this, these bushings are on the inside and the arms are welded on. So that means if these bushings ever go bad, I won't be able to pull them off and replace them. You know, these bushings ideally should be on the outside so we can actually slip them off. But it's something I didn't think about, so you know, keep that in mind, so you don't end up with the same thing. But the good side about having them on the inside is now you get, you know, an inch on each side wider, and in my mind, a wider torque or a wider anti-roll bar is better than a narrow one. All right, now here's the tricky part, is putting this all together. So since I did it not 100% correct, I made sure my mounting bushings are on the shaft. Now you can do it different ways, but I like to use some old copper wire that I stripped, some heavy gauge stuff out of an old, maybe an old nicked up ground cable off your welder or something. But wrap it around these round objects and then you clamp on it, and it works really good. And you don't want to have any what's the word? You don't want to have any ground, you know, where it sparks on the ground or anything on this shaft, because then you could create a weak point and you could create a spot where a fracture will happen, or is more likely to happen. So I've gone ahead. Now I got this table. I'm sure, you know, the Chinese, when they made this table, didn't make it perfectly flat and square. So what I'm going to do, instead of having some kind of awesome jig or something that a lot of places probably do have, I'm just going to first check and make sure, wow, it's actually level. So that's good. Now I'm going to take and measure what angle my arm is at. So we have 8.8. Remember, the top one is the correct one, the bottom one is a referenced, and it might be off a little bit. So we have 9 on this side. I need to pick up the front just a touch. All right, so I got it all set up. As you can see, I got the level. Yeah, look at the top right. That is 0 degrees. On the arm here, which has already been welded, we are at, I hope we can see, 9 degrees. And then on the arm, which we are going to be welding, it was just 9 degrees. But I think it's 8.9. But I think that'll be good enough. It was right at 9 before I turn the camera on, so I don't know why it decided to move, but then so you got that figured out. Then you got to make sure your flush or whatever your measurement for your width is good, and then you got to make sure your square so you got to do that. So you got to get those 3 things set up and fixed, and then you can start welding on it. And what I did is I made some real small tack welds on the inside here, made sure I was still square. And once I knew it was square, you know, I added some more tack welds and had at least 4 tack welds, and then I went to the end and burned in some big tacks on where we had a deep chamfer, and then went inside and welded that up real nice and small, and then went to the outside and really burned it in there. So, but I'm gonna get that wrapped up. All right, just tack this up, and you can see got a few small tacks, and then 4 decent tacks there, and on the outside here, since it's so much deeper than the inside, I'll actually do 2 welds. I'll do one right on the seam basically there, and then the second weld will be a filler type of weld. Yeah, that's it. I just double checked, make sure, you know, everything was square and straight through the whole process. If I had to adjust, you know, I use a little hammer and tapped on the bar to make sure it was square to the other bar. Checked my angles a couple times. Really, that's about it. And then just weld it up. I don't know how well these inner welds will hold, but I'm not too concerned with it. For all I know, the whole thing might just twist apart. So we'll have to see, you know, first time we take it out and see how it goes, I guess. But that's how. So that's how I've come up with a way to do it. Who knows? So I'm gonna finish welding this thing up, and then I will let it cool, let it air cool. All right, so next day I got the arms welded to the shaft. Everything went good. I just let it cool overnight, so that way there's no, I'm not dealing with hot metal. Also, something to think about is the bushings are impregnated with oil, or brass or bronze oil impregnated bushing. So if you heat it up, oil will come out of it. So you want to try to keep those cool. But everything's, their arms are on, and now it's time to actually start installing it in the car. So I've already got it tacked on the bar. You can see I just have one of the tabs, because there's such a tight gap between the coilover tab and this tab. I'm basically going to weld as much as I can on the outside and then fully weld it on the inside, and then the inner tab that I'll install will just be welded on this side here, because of course you can't get in there. But really not much to it. Of course you want to make sure the shaft is parallel to the axle. Tried a few different ways of figuring it out, but what I found was just using my gauge, my angle finder, put it on both bars, and then made both sides match up, and then I tacked everything in. So I'm gonna go on and finish welding this thing up. Anti-roll bar is in the car, so really all that's left is the end links and the end link mounting tabs and the axle housing. The key thing that I've found when looking into how to install these and what the tips and tricks. So the first tip or trick is you really want your anti-roll bar arm to be perpendicular to the travel direction of the axle. That's going to give you the most leverage out of that anti-roll bar you can get. If there's any angles to anything, then it reduces the torque capacity basically of that anti-roll bar arm. Well, it doesn't reduce it, but it reduces the work that it's doing basically. So, of course, the most important part, or the most important time, is when you're at ride height, ready to launch. You want the max torque capacity or torque application from the anti-roll bar arm to be at that point in time, so that way it will maintain the twist from happening, right? So that's number one. The number two thing is going to be making sure your end link is as much as is possible to be perpendicular to that ARB arm, because if it is at an angle, then it's going to try and push that whole mount system around, not just up and down, but also front to back. And you don't want that, because that's going to be, again, a loss of the ability to apply torque from one side to the other. I'm going to get in under the car right now and show you kind of like what you don't want, I guess. All right, so the one thing you don't want is for your ARB arm to be pointed like that when you're at ride height. Because like I said, it's actually going to make from the center of your torque rod to the end point shorter, which will then reduce your amount of torque that you can apply into the bar and out of the bar. So you want to make sure, you want to try, if at all possible, to make sure this arm is perpendicular, because your axle is going to travel this way. You want this arm to be perpendicular to that motion of that direction of travel, or plane of travel. And these arms are kind of tapered. So what I did was just leveled it out. Well, I leveled the one side of it out, and then just went and measured the other side, and then you divide that in half, and that's what you try and make the one side to. Now it looks like these Team Z ones, these Team Z arms, billet arms, are about 9 degrees. So I made, roughly 4.5 degrees. Should put the center line of the torque rod parallel to the center line of the, or within the same plane, horizontal plane of the center line of the end link hole. I'm sure you noticed that I can tap this thing around and it sits it stays stationary without any weight on it, and some of the instructions for some of these say they should be falling on their own weight. While these bushings are sized good and they spin well, I think during the welding it just kind of put everything in a little bit of a small bind. Nothing like horrible. I mean, I can move it like this. It's a little sticky, but I think that'll work itself out after some launches. Just needs to kind of wear in a little bit. It's nothing too horrible, or nothing horrible enough to worry about, I should say, at least from my viewpoint. The next thing, number 2, is you don't want your end link to be, you know, at drastic angles. Obviously, kind of limited unless you just have a ton of bars. So I do have a small angle on this, but it won't be too drastic. So you want to try and get that as you want to try to get your end link as mounted as perpendicular to your arm as possible. That way there's the best chance of actually applying the most amount of torque that this arm can, or at least transmitting from one side to the other all the torque that's being inputted into it to the other side. Now when it comes to figuring out, you know, the length of your end link, the thing, I have my rear axle, of course, set at ride height with my fake shocks, and I have my ARB arm, you know, perpendicular to the plane of travel that the axle will go through, and my car is level, so I know that my angles are good on my ARB. Next thing I did was just took an end link and I taped in the adapter into the tube and put a end link adapter heim joint on the ARB arm, and then I just kind of, you know, eyeballed how this is gonna fit up. And as you can see, I got a few different marks on there. And thinking about whether I want the end link heim joint to be sticking out for adjustment abilities, and, you know, do I need some movement, some travel of this thing. The other thing you have to think about is when your travel, or when your axle is at full droop, will there be enough there that the ARB can fully move and articulate, but also is it going to cause a binding scenario, or a what's the word, you know, will it actually stop travel before you are at full travel? That's one thing that's kind of tough to do, because you got to move your axle down, see how that works out. So you kind of got to have the end link together to figure that out. So what I did is I figured I wanted to have a little bit of the heim joint, you know, on the adjustment thread sticking out, so that way if I needed to move it up or down, I could. So I cut a piece 3 inches long, and we'll see how that works out. Of course, I'll just tack it in and see that I have good movement, you know, nothing binds, nothing stops the suspension travel before it reaches its actual limit, and we'll go from there. But I did make drill holes here, and I don't know exactly the purpose. I'm thinking just for rotation. You know, usually your rosette welds like this will be are your strongest welds. So So I think everybody just puts them in for a little safety factor when they do these heim joint adapters. So a big thing to keep in mind here is that you actually have two pairs of adapters and heim joints. And they do that because when you turn this end link, you want both ends to grow. So that means you need to have a right hand thread and a left hand thread. And the way you know, if you don't know this, is you can see on this left hand thread there's little marks in the corners of the nut, and then also a line in the adapter. That means that that's the left hand thread, and none, no line, no marking in the nut means that it's a right hand thread. You want both of these on one end link. So don't get those mixed up, because then you will definitely kick yourself in the butt. So I'm going to go ahead and get these tacked up and mocked up, and we'll see how things work. Alright, so back under the car now. My end link is all tacked up. My rear end is at ride height and fixed. My ARB arm is at 4.5 degrees, so I know that the horizontal plane between the center line of this shaft and this hole is horizontal. Now all I had to do was, this will be tough, was first started figuring out side to side where it goes for 90 degrees on my end link, and then try to find the best front to back position. Try to get to 90 degrees, but it would put it so far forward that it just wasn't working. So I'm about 5 degrees off, which I think will be okay. You don't want to get too drastic, because otherwise the end link will try to push or pull in this direction more, and then so you'll actually get a push or pull force going back and forth on this, and you won't really be transferring as much torque from side to side. You can see I put a Sharpie mark right there, and now I'm going to take and remove my bolts from my fake shocks, put it down to max extension, and then we'll see what kind of angle this all comes out to and if it's any good or not. Alright, so now I have my rear end lower down to the max stroke of the shock, and if you look from the side, you can see, yes, the arm is pointing down quite a bit, but with my end link mounts in position where my Sharpie mark is, you can see that this here is less than 180 degrees from this face to this face. So that means as the rear end comes up, this should still articulate back up and work just fine. Obviously you don't want this to be straight, because then you might lock your rear end in place, or it could try and flip back across and then get stuck, and that could cause some serious issues. But I think we're going to be in good shape here, so I'm going to go ahead and finish out welding these end links and start working on getting my mounting tabs welded to the axle tube. So well, I'll get that done and knocked out and show you guys what it turns out, or the finished result is. Alright, well, I got the tabs welded to the axle tubes, and do a little test right here, see if it works. So as you can see, under the driver's side of the rear end I have the jack, and on the passenger side I have the hydraulic jack. And I'll go ahead and start jacking up on the passenger side, and just as it should, the axle tube on the passenger side is pushing up on that anti-roll bar arm, so that the anti-roll bar shaft transfers that torque over to the driver's side. It lifts the driver's side axle tube up to keep the axle, center line, and the chassis parallel to each other. So that part's done. I'm still determining how I'm going to run my brake lines, because I may need to add some tabs at the rear end for that, and if I do, then I want to do that obviously before I paint or powder coat the rear end. So I gotta come up with that idea, but if I do that, that would be the last thing I need to do this rear end, and then it's ready for paint or powder coat or whatever I decide to do with it. I think I'm contemplating also on adding some bars. Oh, get that out of the way. The only thing tying this rear roll bar or roll cage bar to the chassis is a sheet metal, which is spot welded to the subframe. So I'm debating on running maybe a crossbar and then some little pieces off of here to that crossbar, and maybe even some Xing, so that way the torque of the anti-roll bar doesn't, you know, twist, so just some rigidity so to handle the torque of the anti-roll bar. But I gotta figure that out yet. So that's how you install the Team Z weld it yourself billet arm anti-roll bar. I guess wait, see if it works in a few months, but I don't see why it won't. So guys, take it easy, get in that garage and turn your dream into a goal and crush it. See ya.